Alright, so this video is a little late, and we're gonna more or less talk about why when we talk about Clerks III, which is where I want to start, and then we have two more movies to get to also. And the thing about it is not just, this video being late, but also there's a lot more stuff that's out that I wanted to talk about. Pearl obviously came out, but I'm kind of holding on to like Pearl and Barbarian and stuff like that, and they're all going to be like in one review video together, like the horror ones together next month, early next month, and then we'll talk about that probably around the time the new Hellraiser comes out, which I think is in that first week of October. But the reason I want to start with Clerks 3 is because I was clearly supposed to see other movies besides these three, and Clerks 3, I saw the first Fathom night that they did, Tuesday on the 13th, I think it was. And the thing about this is, I'm not gonna go, like, into exactly what happens in, like, the last, in, like, the third act of the movie or anything. But I will be probably saying a bit more than people who want to go in kind of blind might want to hear. So, like, if you haven't seen it, I might be saying more than you want to hear. But apart from that, the reason that I also want to avoid specifically talking about, like, the last, third of the movie or so, or the last half hour or 20 minutes or so, isn't necessarily to avoid spoilers. It's just that I saw Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back in 2001 in the theater when it came out when I was like 10, and that was my introduction to the Viewers universe. And the thing about that is, it does seem like, the whole movie is one giant in-joke, so what was I possibly thinking was going on throughout the movie at that time? But it was just, being a 10-year-old at an R-rated movie was an event in itself, and it's like, when you're that age and you're watching an R-rated movie, you kind of already automatically assume all the jokes are going over your head anyway. I think that's the only way I can explain that I still had a good time at that movie, and that it prompted me to want to know more about the other movies that Jay and Silent Bob were in. And so it was shortly after that I tracked down all the movies on VHS, and watched them all the way through, and then have done so many, many times over the last 20 years, just over and over. I feel like I can quote every single movie front to back that's in the Viewers universe. And now that I've said that, I feel like it would make more sense for me to say that the other reason I don't want to talk about the last bits of this movie are, if I were to open up that Pandora's box, this video would be like probably 2 hours long, and there's still two other movies that I want to get to, so I will do my best to kind of dance around that. But what's funny about going into this is that I remember we were all like, the people were starting to come in before it started, and there was a guy at the end of the row that I was in, and he just kept telling the other person, "Oh my god, this is going to be so funny. Oh my god, I can't wait for this. This is going to be hilarious." Uh, and yeah. So as far as it being a comedy, I'm surprised that I come out of it with the feeling that the movie is okay as far as a comedy goes, but as far as being a drama, it's pretty great and pretty effective. And I'd been hearing stuff like, he was going back to like his Chasing Amy roots and stuff like that, where he was able to make a comedy that was kind of a full-on drama at heart. It just kind of had funny stuff around it throughout it, and it was like kind of disguised as a comedy when it kind of wasn't. And I think you could say the same thing about this pretty clearly. But here's the thing: is that stuff like Chasing Amy has some pretty emotional moments, and Clerks 2 has some pretty emotional moments. Like, I remember it being this really big kind of emotional moment when they're in jail in the second movie, and Randall has his big speech about how he doesn't want Dante to leave, and how they could buy the quick stop, and how this could be the start of a new life, and stuff like that. And that's, like, it kind of gets you there. And so, when Kevin Smith was coming out, and he was doing the rounds, and the cast were doing the rounds and all that, they were talking about how emotional the movie was. Bring tissues and stuff like that, and people were saying they were, like, ugly crying and stuff like that, which oftentimes can be a bit blown out of proportion, especially if they're, promoting the movie. But when I heard that, like, oh yeah, the movie's emotional, bring tissues and stuff like that, I'm thinking, like, Clerks 2, like when Randall's giving his speech. And you're like, oh, that's kind of moving. And oh man, I'm almost unexpectedly feel like I could cry right now. Um, Needless to say, what this movie is and the directions that it goes were not what I was expecting. And the thing about that is one of the things I want to talk about that would probably be saying too much to somebody that hasn't seen it yet, or is going in, or wants to go in blind, or whatever. And that is the fact that we are hit with something immediately during the opening credits that genuinely shocked me. Like, I felt like, like, oh my god. And obviously that, and because this opening is amazing. Like, the Welcome to the Black Parade opening, and it's like this really rousing thing where we're seeing, Dante still going through the motions and Randall still going through the motions, but it just felt so grand, and it was just the perfect way to open this movie, especially knowing that he wanted to be sure that it was a conclusion, and I love this opening so much, and right in the middle of it, is just this very nonchalant reveal that Becky, the Rosario Dawson character from Clerks 2, has apparently died in between movies. And typically, you would just see that and you would think, oh, that's kind of a lazy trope, to write somebody out of the movie. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, they usually, and sometimes it's like, it just seems like the most narratively lazy thing you could do to get a character out of the story. But I don't know if it was just because of my attachment to Clerks 2 and her and Dante's story and where it left off that shocked me, but also the fact that I knew Dawson was in the movie. So, like, and you saw, like, that promotional still that was, like, all of them standing there, and it's like, you go into this movie completely under the assumption that Dawson is in this movie, and her name is right there in the opening credits. And so it was like, what's going on? What happened? And so, like, that right away it was just like, okay, that was a shock, and then the movie can continue, and then the comedy's gonna kick in. And that is what happens, and we do know that even if you're like me and you kind of avoid, like TV spots and trailers and stuff like that, you still know from all the talk surrounding this movie that the movie is going to begin with Randall having a heart attack. Exactly the way that Kevin Smith did in real life. And I wasn't expecting how exactly on the nose that was going to be, where if you've heard Kevin Smith tell that story, and I have many times on all the different, talk shows and interviews that he did, it's like a 10-minute story when he goes through the whole thing. And every single detail of that story, the way he told it in interviews, is how it plays out in the movie, all the way down to the doctor's dialogue with him. And the whole, Randall being afraid of his small dick thing. So that was kind of surreal, like seeing this story that actually happened and heard so many times, like, play out through these characters that we've already known for over 20 years. And it's like, and taking this very serious moment, but making it, light and comedic, which sounds like what happened in real life, was that there were bizarrely comedic moments as, Kevin Smith thought he was dying. And so, like, that's actually, perfectly suited for a movie, especially one of his movies. But still, in between, we get little doses of, what happened to Dawson between movies. And there's also this small moment that I felt like was one of those kind of emotional moments, especially as we're seeing characters make turning points here, where as Randall's about to be, pushed through the doors on the stretcher, Dante puts his hand on his, and he, like, grabs it, because that's... And I think it hits because that's not really the way we know Randall. It's like seeing Randall in this moment where he thinks he might die. We actually see this tender moment between them, which I said, like we said, is only something that happens maybe once per Clerks movie, that Randall has a moment like this. And to have it this early on, and to kind of see Randall both scared and appreciating this bond that he has with Dante, as it goes into this bizarre and ridiculous scene, as they fix what his problem is. And then obviously that's where the movie begins, where he gets the idea that he has this very serious and unfortunately relatable moment where he's like, my life flashed before my eyes, and there was nothing there. Like, the movie of my life sucked. And it's like nothing happened. Like, it was just, saying, like, observing movies and all that, and just that kind of being what your life is, rather than making one yourself. And so that's what it is. And then essentially, Randall more or less becomes Kevin Smith again. He goes from being the current Kevin Smith, who is post-heart attack, to the Kevin Smith that made Clerks. And just kind of the progression when you start to realize that, like, yeah, he talks about, oh, I'm going to make a movie about, our life here at the store, and it's going to be great. And there's and I guess there's something that you could, nitpick here, where it's like he's talking about making his life feel worthwhile, and it's like talking about all the stuff that happened at the store and all the crazy stuff that happened at the store. But yet, and he's essentially making Clerks, the first movie, and it's like, well, we know that the first Clerks movie is only in the span of a day. So it's like, so it's like all this amazing stuff that he's putting into his script is stuff that essentially only happened in one day of his life. Which could be a joke in itself, but then there's other things to go into also, like, like, once he's completed the movie, it's like, is that what we were seeing when we were seeing Clerks all along? Like, is the first movie maybe just a composite of things? Like, once again, like Smith's life himself, where he was a clerk there, and then making a movie with all these different moments where it's like, combined to appear to be one day. That's a whole other rabbit hole you can go down as far as interpreting the View Askew universe completely differently from now on because of this movie. But yes, just in the context of the movie, he is putting together all these moments and essentially making the first movie. And really the second movie also. Like, almost like he's doing like what Mel Brooks did with Young Frankenstein, where he combined Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein into one movie. I'm assuming that's basically what Randall's plan here is with Clerks and Clerks 2. So that whole thing, and then all the jokes that come in, like, the moment where Silent Bob speaks for the first time it could not be more perfect. And we're really seeing, like, the fourth wall essentially gets demolished, throughout this whole thing. And it's kind of a beautiful experience for a fan, because you can say, because we've been talking about, in the post-View Askew universe movies, how it's been kind of, even if they aren't great, most of them, it's been very interesting and fun to see Kevin Smith just make whatever the hell he wants to make. And it's like Yoga Hosers, how it's like clearly probably his worst movie, but it's like just the fact that he thought of that and then made it, there's still something to that that's kind of amazing. So now that he's sort of come back to what he's really always been, which is doing things for his fans, and there's stuff where it feels like, just fan service and lazy fan service and stuff like that. There was a guy like right next to me that like was like, oh yeah, every time a callback happened, and callbacks happen like every 5 seconds or so once the movie really gets going. So the guy next to me was very vocal. And it was, and I'm not really that mad about it, because that's, what the movie's essential purpose is. And there are moments where it does feel kind of forced, like, the way the "in a row" line is utilized kind of felt forced, and there's a few other things here and there, but for the most part, it was a movie that was clearly fan service from beginning to end, but it also felt like, in this particular context of what the movie's story is, it makes perfect sense. Like, it's the perfect way to utilize every single callback you can think of. And so that, was fine, but as far as, like, where the comedy maybe doesn't work, there are times where Smith has this tendency to really, really get married to one joke, and then that's just kind of what happens. And so Elias's presence throughout this movie is essentially that, and I don't really... When Elias's joke starts, where Randall's in the hospital, and he's been, consumed by religion and Jesus and stuff like that, and then because this bad thing happened to Randall and Elias's prayers haven't been answered yet, he decides to start worshiping the devil. Which is a funny joke in itself, and it's funny when it first hits in that first moment in the waiting room with Dante. Dante's just kind of having to witness this over-dramatized thing happen in front of him. Is very funny, But then that's essentially Elias's joke for the rest of the movie. Is that like he's in some different goth getup every time we see him, and that's it. And it's like each one's more over the top than the last, but there's really nothing to it, and it's never really funny after that scene in the waiting room, and it happens every time Elias is on screen, which is a lot. So there's that whole thing, and the NFT thing, whatever that is, it felt very dated for starters, especially since it plays such a continuous role in this. But yeah, but still, the dialogue is here and the scenes are here that really bring back that feel where it doesn't necessarily just feel specifically like callbacks, but it's like the reasons why we loved the first and second movie, the first movie especially, like the conversations about Star Wars, where I've said many times before that the independent contractors scene in Clerks is like that's just perfect writing. That whole scene. Most of the first movie is perfect writing. And so here, when they continue to talk about Star Wars, it just makes sense because these are those characters. Like, that's what they would always be doing. Even this, far into their lives, that's still what they're going to be doing. So, like, a lot of the things about this movie are analogies related to Star Wars. Like, Dante's involvement in the script and how important he is a very funny discussion. And even the whole thing about, like, changing the name slightly and stuff like that is also really funny stuff. Like, just anything surrounding the making of the movie is a lot funnier and more clever than I thought when I heard, like, a brief plot synopsis a while back, where I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to work. And that portion of the movie works very, very well. And like I said, and is clever, which I wasn't quite expecting. I don't want that to sound like a backhanded compliment, but that's essentially what happened. And then there's the audition scene where we get a lot of cameos and callbacks and stuff like that. Like Ethan Suplee is in there. There's one I kept waiting for. I knew the joke was coming, but I didn't know who it was gonna be. I just had because the movie was clearly so low budget and people were just coming in and out. I was fully expecting the moment where an actor came in to audition for Randall's movie that was actually it would be revealed that they were playing themselves, and that couldn't have worked better because it's like I knew the joke was coming, but I love who it ended up being. And there's also another cameo I'm sure we were expecting that we loved to see after we heard the story going into reboot, which is the fact that Ben Affleck obviously has a brief part here. And what I really loved about that I was actually kind of touching, was the fact that if you know about Kevin Smith and Ben Affleck's relationship as far as their movies and the movies they made in the past, you know that Affleck really, really loves to ad-lib and just kind of do random takes. And it's something that's kind of driven Kevin Smith crazy because Smith's under the impression that Affleck's really not very good at the ad-libbing thing. And it's just kind of been this running joke that seems to have gone on through their whole professional relationship. So I love that it appears to be, I can't confirm this myself, at least yet, but just by watching the scene, it felt like Smith just turned the camera on and said, okay, you're always wanting to ad-lib in my movies, go for it. This is your chance. Just do whatever. And it's like, I hope that's the way the scene played out, because it also feels like the sort of perfect capping on, Affleck being in the VS universe and stuff like that. So all of this is going great. There's stuff like Walt Flanagan is here, kind of combining characters. A lot of people I feel like are combining characters. Like, Mosier and all those people that were always coming in and out and playing different characters in the first movie. And of course, Flanagan played both the egg guy and the highly offended guy that may or may not have been a jizz mopper. And so there's a point in time where the egg guy says the line, "You've highly offended me," and it's like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to do two callbacks in one, and acknowledge that he played both characters. Okay, that's nice. There's an especially nice moment, that may or may not be the last shot of the movie, where it seems that Kevin Smith's mom played the milkmaid in the first, and I think the second movie also, and now that part is filled in with Harley, his daughter, which I feel like is a nice sort of, homage to just his family's involvement in general in these movies. So, to go more into the dramatic nature of it, as much as I can without this video taking all day. So to talk about the Dawson stuff, as I said, there was the shock moment of just finding out that she died. Where, like, that's the moment where you kind of... Because, like I said, the trope has been used so many times of killing off a character between movies that, it's, in any other circumstance, I feel like it would have just been, oh, okay, that's kind of a lazy choice, but whatever. If you want to write the character out, fine. But I felt like, it did, not just because I knew Dawson was in the movie and that had my mind going multiple places, but the fact that having that reaction also kind of showed, like, just how you can be more attached to characters than you may realize, especially if they've been around for a long time and they're characters that you've revisited over and over and over again, and how there are these moments, like, like you go back to the first Clerks movie and you talk about, things that happened in it, and it's like you see those scenes so many times, and you know people also who have seen those scenes so many times. Maybe you've often watched these scenes together with these very same people. And so when you recall scenes from the first movie, like character interactions, this is even the second one too, especially the scenes with like Randall and Elias and stuff like that. When you recall scenes from movies like this that you've seen so many times, it feels less like you're talking about moments from fictional characters in a movie you saw, but it's almost like you're talking about it like these people are people you actually know. Like, these are friends of yours that these things happen to, and that's what it feels like when you recall the things that happen in those other two movies. And so when you don't, like I said, it's almost like you don't even realize how close to these characters you get, until these extreme things kind of start to happen. And so when we see Dante, at the gravesite, this could have just been another scene. Like, there is one moment where he and this vision of Dawson are talking, and she's going through all the people that she's banged in heaven. And it's like, that feels like it went on for a very, very long time. And it's like, okay, we could probably, cut this down or get to some point of this scene or whatever. And then the scene starts to kick in. And something is revealed here that I really should have seen coming, and for some reason it blindsided me in this moment at the cemetery where Dante's talking to her, and it's like you see Dante pull in at the beginning of the movie. He's setting up the store like he always has, and everything's playing out. We learn that she died in between movies. And, like, the question kept going in and out of my head. I never lingered on it, but, like, every now and then the question would pop in my head, where's the kid? Because she was pregnant with his baby at the end of the second movie. And then this cemetery scene kind of reveals what happened in that sense, and just the timeline in general of the movies. And this is a point where there's a lot of conflicting feelings that come into play with this movie's dramatic moments, and a lot of it is, how do we feel about the previous movies now, particularly the second movie, because the second movie is more or less, a feel-good movie with a feel-good and optimistic ending, and now Clerks 2 is just not the same now. The Clerks 2 can never be the same again because of this. Like, Clerks 2 will always have a tragic feeling to it from now on, even if you try to block it out. This movie's dramatic moments stick so much, I don't know how that's going to be possible. Like, I will try it eventually, but I'm kind of dreading going back to Clerks 2 now, and that's not a good feeling at all. But, so there were moments, there's these moments and the moments we're not talking about, where I was actually starting to have the debate, is this too depressing? It's very, dramatic, and it's definitely effective, but, like, is there a line here that's being crossed? Is it too much? And it's like, because when you just get hit after hit after hit of just these tragedies and these really, kind of devastating moments, and it's like you kind of just want to stop Smith and say, like, dude, number one, are you okay? And number two, slow down. like these hits are really heavy and they're awfully frequent for one movie. um, but that's the thing is, it's like as long as they're effective, is there a way to establish whether it's too much? Like whether he's working too hard to rip our hearts out completely. To where, like I said, what I was talking before that I forgot to mention was that I was gonna see more movies this week and talk about more movies this week. Um, and I was gonna come back and do a video when I got back that night on Tuesday that 13th. And because of the movie, when I came home, I felt so drained. Like I hadn't even cried or anything, but I just felt so emotionally drained and so depressed that I just kind of laid down and didn't do anything else that night. Because it felt like so much and so much to take in. And like I said, the question I kept asking myself was this too much? Did he go too far with how emotional and depressing the movie is? Especially since at the end of the day, it's, a comedy. I kept thinking about that guy in my row before it started. It was like, oh man, this is gonna be the guy sounded so optimistic. This is gonna be so funny. This is gonna be hilarious, man. And I didn't hear a lot of any talking when it was over, and maybe a little less than half the people left. I think other people knew that the little documentary was coming after the credits, and when his audio comes in during the end credits, and Smith's talking to us and thanking us and stuff like that, which is really nice. But man, I'm really excited for this movie to be out there and for spoilers to be just, whatever, so that we can really hear him talk in depth about the choices he made for this movie and why he felt like this had to be where it all ended. Because to my understanding, there was like a lot of different things this movie could have been, and there were a lot of different ideas and scripts that he went through. And like I'm really curious. I've heard like vague, comments, but I think he's still avoiding spoilers and stuff like that. So when he's able to just really, really talk openly about it, I really want to hear all that and about why he felt everything that happens in this movie was completely necessary, I guess you could say. But to continue on that, I do need to talk about Brian O'Halloran's performance specifically, because yeah, Jeff Anderson has some really big parts here also, and it always blows my mind when I hear like I feel like I've heard that Jeff Anderson has talked a lot about thinking that he's not a great actor, and that's kind of one of the reasons that he's not, in a lot of movies, and besides he and Kevin Smith kind of falling out every now and then, it's another reason why he struggles to come back to these movies, is that he just doesn't really see himself as an actor. But for a guy that doesn't see himself that way and doesn't act very often, Jeff Anderson's really got something special. But Brian O'Halloran, who's another actor that we've seen around, more. He's much more of like a regularly working actor than Jeff Anderson, but the places that he has to go here were something that I would have never seen coming. And it's like, we've known that even though these guys aren't the most experienced actors, there's always been something to it. They've always, brought their A game and as much as they could to these movies. But like I said, the places Brian O'Halloran goes here, there's so many actors that you see. There's actors that you see every single day in a big movie, that I don't think I've ever seen go to the places that Brian O'Halloran goes to in this movie, and completely convincingly. Like it's kind of scary. Like like that's another, like kind of like I was talking about Kevin Smith. Like I had to, like, after this movie, I had to like just search like Brian O'Halloran interviews and stuff like that, and go to like his Instagram and be like, this, he's okay, right? Like he's got a good life, I hope. And it's crazy, and like I said, I don't really know what else? I like the way that they transition into it when he has this really big monologue towards the end, where they're filming the salsa shark scene, and it's like, this is the scene in the first movie where we know that Dante blows up at Randall, shortly before their physical altercation, and that this is a big moment for Dante and his, like, all of his emotions coming out. And the fact that this is where he's reaching in the real world of the movie as well. Where movies started off as this goofy place with this goofy cow mascot, and then by this point in Dante's story is a place of trauma, like where he goes into a full blown panic attack just being outside of the movies that they used to work at, which is also very, very heavy. And then these moments where it's cutting back and forth between the black and white of the movie within the movie and the color of the real world. And we're seeing Dante's feelings are really coming to the surface, not just in the movie, where they happened in real life at that particular time in 1994, but now for many, many different, darker reasons, the same thing is about to happen. His emotions are coming forward and he's about to blow up in this exact same moment, laying in this exact same position that he was in 94. And then the way that scene plays out. Yeah, so then this monologue is pretty much the line drawn in the sand, where pretty much from here on the rest of the movie is a drama, and a really, really, really heavy and emotional one, in a way that I don't think anybody saw coming. Like I said, he can go and do the interviews and say, bring your tissues all you want. I don't think anybody saw this coming. And I still don't know how I feel about it. When I was out of town with my brother just recently, I had a long talk with him about it, because it was like, nobody else has really seen this movie, and I haven't done the video yet. Like, I didn't know, I should have done this video a while back now, earlier this past week, and it was just like, I didn't really know what to think or what to say, because I just hadn't really sorted out completely how I felt. Like, it's one of those things where it'll be a long time from now to where it's like, this movie's just another movie. And it's like, oh, we'll just talk about, like, the Clerks trilogy. And it's like, yeah, it's the Clerks trilogy. Those movies, But, like, just like the title being, like, going to the movies online and, like, seeing the show times and just seeing Clerks 3 there and seeing the poster there, it's just like this almost dreaded feeling inside me, like the movie's really, really hanging on in this way that it's like, it's really hard to just fathom that you would feel this way about these characters at this point in our lives. And it's like, there's the whole point they talk about in the documentary after the credits about how O'Halloran himself is saying, like, if you went to 1994 and you told me that we'd be here in 2022 doing a third movie, it was just like you can't even, like, register that, and let alone feeling about these characters the way that you do. And it's like, and thinking back to when the first time I ever saw Dante and Randall would have been when I saw Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back in the theater in 2001 when I was like 10. And it's like, how, like, go and tell my 10-year-old self about those guys that I saw for a brief minute in that movie, and that this is the way I would feel about them at this point in my life, is so... I was trying to figure out how I felt about the movie in general, and how it made me so depressed, and how I wasn't sure how I felt about how I almost felt a little bit resentful for how depressing the movie is, and how I felt about it. So when I was relaying this to my brother asked me, but is it good? And obviously, like I said, the comedy doesn't always hit. The Elias stuff certainly isn't really hitting, but I feel like it would be impossible to call a movie that makes me feel this much not good. Like, how can you even do that? Like, objectively, if I feel this much about it and I'm struggling this much to sort out my feelings on it, he clearly accomplished something. There is something very much going on with this movie that's really effective in a really deep way, and maybe that will just be for fans. Certainly, people that have seen the movies over and over again and know them in and out and have for 20 plus years. Maybe we are the only ones that'll feel this much about it, but I mean, I feel like that's a pretty decent amount of people. It may seem like kind of a small crowd, but I mean, these are really a lot of people know these characters. So, or at least are aware of them enough to know that what happens in this movie isn't just kind of a throwaway choice to have a conclusion to this trilogy. And yeah, and so I cannot deny the feelings that this movie brings out, and so I have to say that it is, to accomplish that, there's definitely something. That's why I said at the beginning that I don't know how, it's like okay if you're looking at it as a comedy, but if you're looking at it as a drama, and as somebody that has watched these movies so many times and knows the characters as if they're real people, you're you're absolutely gonna feel something. And if the movie was shit, like even if I've known these characters for as long as I have, if the movie was shit and was poorly made, the feelings would not be this strong. Like I feel like that's happened before. This is a kind of a strange example, but like when they killed Bill Pullman in the second Independence Day movie. And it's like, I love Independence Day so much, and I love that character, and I love those moments that he had, like with his daughter after the First Lady died, and then when he gets in the plane at the end, and when he does the big speech and all that, and it's like, there's an attachment to that character, for sure. And then when he doesn't make it through Independence Day 2, I didn't fucking care, because that movie is so shit, it might as well have not even been canon to me. And I felt so distant from it that it just didn't matter. So something had to have happened that worked in this movie, especially dramatically, for my feelings to be all over this. So, and for me to have to come home and just lay down because I didn't feel like doing anything else. There's something in this movie, for sure. I don't know when I'll revisit it, and what that'll do. I do think it'll be a very different movie, when you know the direction that it's going, because like I said, and the thing about it, too, is that you look back, now that I look back in retrospect, there are a couple of kind of clues to it that just kind of go in one ear and out the other, because you kind of think nothing of them. They just seem like throwaway lines or throwaway moments, and they weren't. So, yeah, so I'm curious, but also not exactly in a hurry to get back to it. And like I said, I'm definitely not in a hurry to get back to Clerks 2, but I don't know. I'm not even sure how Juan will feel at this point, but like I said, I'm looking forward to kind of getting to a point to where once this is set in and the movies are just the movies, and we can go back to them whenever, and that this one is what it is, and everybody knows that, and we've come to terms with it, I'll be curious how they play. But until then, there's just a lot of feelings. So, like I said, if we went into the details of what it was, there'd be a whole other half to this video. I feel like we've already gone on for a very long time. Like I said, I've still got 2 movies we need to talk about real quick. So, yeah, the best thing I can say about Clerks 3 is that there's a lot of feelings. So, and that's, take with that what you will, with how we've talked about everything else. So, for just this little bit of time, let's go into Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul, which is a movie I didn't know too much about. I think it was at Sundance, but I hadn't really heard much about the reception or anything like that. So, I just knew that Sterling K. Brown and Regina Hall were in it, and it was kind of a satire of, like, churches and stuff like that, and scandals and stuff like that, and how they were going to go into it. And I was also wondering, like, are people just going to see the title on the marquee and think, like, this is a Pure Flix movie or something, and, like, the people that this movie is not meant for are going to end up seeing this movie? That'd be really fun to see. Yeah, so going in, I was kind of getting vibes of, like, The Eyes of Tammy Faye and stuff like that, where it's like we're kind of seeing a darker side to a story like this, and it is being told in, like, a documentary format, so there's really, really well done, but also very convenient aspect ratio changes, where we're kind of seeing, like, so we know whether we're looking at the documentary or whether we're looking at real life, and the stuff that's kind of trying to shy away from the documentary and kind of still be shrouded in secrecy as far as the sort of potentially shady lives that these people live and the way that they go about their business with this church. Because at the end of the day, that's what it feels like mostly is a business of sorts, which is what a lot of the movie's focus seems to be. And the way that Regina Hall and Sterling K. Brown bounce off each other throughout this movie, where we have stuff like they're clearly, they seem like on opposite ends of where they're coming from. And like when he has his take on Rocky, it's sort of fun to listen to, and the way she sort of steps up and says like, Rocky lost, right? And then he's like, well, Rocky 2, he won, yeah. And it's like you can see where there's definitely a distance here before we even really know what's going on. But what's great about it is as that distance gets farther apart, and oftentimes you can even see it in just like their body language, let alone how they actually interact. Like how there'll be moments where they're in the same shot, they're like right next to each other, and he looks like he could not be more confident, and she looks like she could not be more internally horrified. And it's like just stuff like that itself says everything you need to know about the relationship between these two. And what's interesting is how this works as far as chemistry and actors, because this is a really tricky thing where it's like, usually it'd be the absolute opposite, but because of these characters and the way they are, the farther apart these people feel, the more the chemistry is working between Hall and Brown as actors. Which is really interesting to kind of see that dynamic and how it goes, and how much this distance is going to kind of separate them. But there's still, it still seems like they're both going down these paths, because obviously Hall's character is the whole, will do anything to keep up appearances, and and it's still like attached to him through this marriage and their business and this church and all that. Where it's like they're basically the Siamese twins from hell, essentially. Uh, and it's in seeing that, because the way they play this, where there are clearly secrets going on that we don't know about, and how the movie has to make sure it's not showing its hand at all times. And like Brown's character especially can be so hard to read at times, with the way that he reacts to certain things, and just trying to read his eyes in certain situations where like he can be in one situation and appear to be one way, but then like his eyes will be a totally different story. And then Hall has moments that do seem to do that a bit more outwardly, but I feel like her internal moments are kind of significantly bigger by being smaller, if that makes sense in that wording. Because there are moments where you can really see an intensity in Sterling K. Brown, particularly through his eyes, when especially when he's involved in confrontations. There's clearly something very intense and very wounded about this person. It's like every time, the way he's able to go back and forth, to where in one scene you could be like, this guy kind of comes off like he might be a real piece of shit. And then there'll be another scene right after it or right before it where you can just really get the sense of how internally wounded this person is. And just the way he's able to go back and forth between that, and you feel what you're supposed to feel as each scene comes, just as effectively as before, regardless of the more that's revealed about the character or anything like that. But and as far as them being vague about what the scandal is, I was asking myself throughout a lot of the movie, it's like, are they intentionally hiding it? Because there are moments throughout, and there's clues that are given to us throughout that do feel like it's pretty clear what's going on and what has happened. Especially when you see, especially when you hear about religion and people high up in religion, there's going to be secrets about these people that are very contradictory to the things that they say out loud. That very, very loud. And so, you could say, oh yeah, it's that old thing. But it's the way that's sort of revealed, and like I said, the way we see it through him, to where it's clear that we don't know anything about, his life prior to... Really, we don't know much about his life prior to this scandal. But it's we get the sense that this person has been wounded because they've been hiding something for a very, very long time. And the fact that he's able to give that without the movie feeling too blatant about it is really, really skillful. And then what Hall is doing here, like I said, as far as her internal stuff, there's one particular scene towards the end where she's doing like what is it, like praise miming or something, where she literally puts on mime makeup, and it spends the entire sort of climax of the movie, like the entire third act of the movie, in this mime makeup, and going through the emotions that she does. There's some imagery in this that looks insane, especially with her having to emote in the ways that she has to emote with this, and like just the imagery of it alone is something that really, really sticks. And there's one moment where she kind of reaches this breaking point, but it's sort of after she's been outward about it, and the camera lingers a lot longer than you think it's going to. And it's like we're just sort of waiting to see what else is inside her in this moment. So like she has her big moment, and then it's like all internalized, but the camera just like stays there, and the expressions that she makes in this moment are eerily good. It's scary how good it is. And so both of them, it's a real shame that both of them aren't like in the awards race, because they would absolutely deserve it, and really earn it. And that's really, I like this movie, like in all, like in total. But it's like for it to be as good as it is, like their performances being as top notch as they can possibly be are doing it a lot of favors. So there's that, and there's even stuff like there are moments in the movie that feel really dark. There's a sex scene in the movie that feels very, very dark, and it's like the music and the way it plays out. Like you just know, even before we know what we know, the scene just feels like there's something really off in this really sort of eerie way. And it's like maybe it's a little too much, but I don't know. But I just kind of I was really intrigued by that feeling of this scene being as off-putting as it was, and what is going on between these two, because something really is not right or something. Like something is clearly amiss in this marriage and through this whole thing. And there's like some sort of bit of irony where after the fact he says, thank you, God, in this moment of all moments. And there's also there's a singing in the car moment, which typically are scenes that I'm against because they just feel like filler. But this one feels so much like it's definitely a character moment, and it definitely feels like the whole idea of seeing two completely different sides of these characters as far as their outward persona and then who they are behind closed doors. It really felt like it spoke to that, and so I really like that scene also. And yeah, there's a lot of side characters going on here too that come in and out, and the way they're like it's revealed like who they are, and like how especially Regina Hall kind of interacts with them, and it's like how there's that sort of it's everybody's trying to be pleasant on the surface, but there's definitely also something hostile you can tell between them, just kind of underlying, that's like really, really uncomfortable in this really effective way. Um, and there's the other people that own like the rival church. Um, like there's the well, I can't remember the actress's name now, unfortunately. But I believe the character's name is Shakura. And in like this very first scene, in the scene where they're being interviewed and we're getting the introduction to these characters, I was talking about like the internalized stuff and the stuff that's not so big, and this character in this whole interview scene seems to change her expression to something completely different, like every few seconds, and it's crazy, and so stuff like that I feel like really I really love the way this movie kind of shows off the characters and these moments that can go really big and theatrical, but can also just in an instant go really small and like blink and you'll miss it sort of expressions. And that's I think what I appreciated most about the movie. But like I said, I kind of like the thing as a whole, but it's the performances are really, really what make it. And like I said, Sterling K. Brown and Regina Hall are absolutely award worthy. And like I said, it's unfortunate that they aren't even really on the radar, because I know I say that as I have so many performances I haven't seen yet, that haven't come out yet, but I mean, that's, yeah, they're both incredible. So let's go ahead and end with Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which is, I guess you could say, a family movie by A24, which is something that I don't know how many people expected. Apparently, this is based on like YouTube videos and stuff like that that Jenny Slate and her then husband, who's the director of the movie, had put together, and they were like this sort of sensation. I don't really recall ever hearing about that in the moment. Like, apparently, there was also a book afterwards or something like that. Like, it was a whole thing. And like the existence of this movie, I feel like is the first time I've ever heard of this character. But it's definitely a character that feels almost. I know you don't want to immediately jump in and say instantly iconic or anything like that, but I mean, if the character already has been around for like a decade or so, then I guess it wouldn't be instant. But I do feel like this character is going to be memorable for a very, very long time. He and his grandmother, really. And what I think, what I just need to point out immediately about this movie, that I feel like speaks a lot to its sort of the universal acclaim that it's gotten, or seemingly gotten, is that it could have so easily been like really cutesy, like annoyingly cutesy. Where like everything that happens is for the sake of being, you know, super adorable and stuff like that. But not only does it kind of just do that organically, and the characters are lovable in themselves anyway, to where it doesn't feel like they're trying too hard. But there's a snarkiness to this movie, and particularly Marcel, that I wasn't expecting, and I feel like that's kind of the perfect balance to make sure that the movie isn't too in, you know, one direction and too like, you know, trying to be as adorable as possible, whatever. And so it's like some of the, you know, comebacks are just lines that he says, and it's like it's always because, you know, he's so small and adorable that it's, even though he has snarky moments throughout the movie, I felt like they always kind of caught me by surprise when they happened, because you still never quite expect it from a character like this. Like there's even like they even somehow found a way to put in a good-natured pubic hair joke towards the beginning. That was also quite unexpected. But then when we get stuff like, you know, when Marcel's looking at the internet and he's reading YouTube comments, and he's talking about how superfluous it is to sign a comment with peace, and then like and it's like it's not just that he mentions that, but it's not, you know, just a, you know, this, you know, hilarious snarkiness, but he doesn't just make a comment, he starts riffing. Like, he makes one comment, then he makes another, and he builds on himself, on his own comments. And it's hilarious. I think that's probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie, actually. And certainly one of the funniest. But, yeah, but the way it can do that, but also be good-natured, is, like, a really perfect balance that this movie definitely needed. To where you could still, like, it still feels like it has a bit of bite to it, but it still absolutely feels like, you know, a family movie, essentially. And just with these, you know, really clever details in there, like how, he talks about how one of the characters speaks with a different accent, and the reason for that is because the character comes from the garage. Because the world inside the house is so enormous, and, like, basically its own universe. It's that big to them. And then there'll just be, like, these throwaway comments, like how, despite the gigantic nature of everything here, apparently Marcel has seen Sister Act, and can make references to it. And stuff like that, where it's like, you can see the smallness of the world to us, but also the hugeness of the world through him, kind of at the same time. And then there's, as it goes further and further into that, there's like a whole existential vibe that it gets going on after a while. Like there's one time where he drives Marcel up to like a hill, and he's able to look down on the city. And, you know, to him, this is like when we look up at space. But then for him to be told, like, you know, oh no, this is just like one city. Like, this is barely anything at all compared to everything else that you can't see. And so that, obviously, anything, you know, as far as the way Marcel looks at the world can be put right back on us, as far as, like, you know, not knowing the hugeness around us. And so that parallel always kind of makes... It's sort of like... makes the character relatable in this way that you don't even really realize in the moment. Where it's like, how are you ever going to relate to just this small shell with one eye and shoes? But it's like there's that whole aspect, the whole existential aspect. Then there's the whole aspect with the grandma, who is Isabella Rossellini, in a very inspired bit of casting. And it's clear that this character is very old and very worn down, and Marcel is kind of the only one that's with her because his family is missing after this whole incident. There's also this moment where he's going through like his family tree, and it's like this equally funny and sad moment where it's like it's funny like when we see the different characters and how he describes them, but it's also sad to know that they're missing and these two characters are essentially alone. And like I said, it's always finding the balance, which is really crucial here. But as far as him being left with his grandma, a character who's essentially winding down because she's very old, it does go into that whole thing of like dealing with the ups and downs of, you know, being around a family member that might be on their way out, and just the very mixed and complicated feelings that can bring. And it's like how it's so almost nonchalantly goes into stuff like this and portrays stuff like this so naturally, despite the fact that this is a tiny shell that's wearing shoes. It's very bizarre how much they were able to make this work on so many different creative levels, because everything I've just mentioned is the stuff that you can take away from it and, like, you know, talk about to great extent. That's not even talking about, like, you know, the stop motion animation is also just extremely well done, to the point that I didn't even realize until I was hearing about it later that it's like technically considered an animated movie, which honestly I don't even know if that would have occurred to me. But I mean, yeah, it really is. Even with, you know, live action people kind of coming in and out, it feels predominantly animated. And the fact that you can pretty much forget that, or like not even really realize that until after the fact, is really impressive. So that's I feel like that. I mean, it's so straightforward, yet also has all these things you can really look into and see as this really bigger picture. There's yeah, I mean, without, you know, really going into that, that's pretty much all I can really say here. And it's like I can really appreciate how they were able to not just find those balances between, you know, happy and sad, or, you know, cute and snarky and all that, and just be impressive on a production level. But it's yeah, I even lost what I was saying there, but yeah, you get it. So that's what I take away from this. So I think that's going to be it for this. Yeah, we'll pick up all the movies that I haven't touched on yet, like The Woman King and oh, I'm losing track now. There's like so many kind of came out here all at once, and like I said before, Pearl and Barbarian and stuff like that, and The Invitation, all those horror ones, those horror new releases will be in their own video next month, early next month, and then we'll talk about all those all at once. So I think the next thing after this is another remake versus and our next Q&A and moving club and stuff like that. That's all going to kind of be jumbled in here together in the same space, these next 4 videos. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.